Can we rise for the reading of the Gospel? The Holy Gospel today from St. Luke in the 16th chapter. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'Well, what will I do now that my master is taking this position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'Well, how much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. And he said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If you then have not been faithful with dishonest wealth, with dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Lord, you've provided us with all we need. Show us how to be good stewards and wise stewards. Amen. Well, today I just want to talk about this gospel lesson we just heard. And oh, is it a lesson. I can tell you right now, preachers do not like this lesson. It's hard. But anyway, and we could get lost in the details of the story. Well, what about this? What about that? But think the main point here. The main point is God's abundant forgiveness. God's abundant forgiveness, okay? So keep that in your head now as we talk about this. Because the story itself is disturbing. It's not a nice story. It really isn't. A manager is caught, it says, squandering his master's property. When a thief is caught, what happens to the thief? Well, this guy says, I know I'm caught. And then he turns around and goes to those who owe the master, and what does he do? He ingratiates himself. He works in with them, and he says, take your bill. If it says 100, write 50. Smart guy. The end of the story just doesn't have the result we think. It's not how our work. And we're puzzled. It says, verse 8 is the sticky one. It says, the master commended the dishonest steward. Commended, yeah. And you go, what? What's he commending him for? Theft? Fraud? Stealing? So, and then starting in verse 9, we have Jesus' commentary on the story. And the commentary is conflicting to me. We're given, I guess, verse 9. Is the point of this story that we're like the manager, we should make friends with dishonest people? That's what verse 9 says. Or verse 10, is the point of the story that if we will be faithful a little, then a much will be given us? Or verse 11 now, is the point of the story that if we're faithful with dishonest wealth, then we won't be entrusted with true riches? Or the last verse of Jesus' commentary, is the point if we have been unfaithful with what belongs to another person, then who will entrust us with riches of our own? That's why I say I think Jesus' commentary just muddles it even further for me anyway. Now, the other problem I have with this little story is I don't identify with the parable. Usually, Jesus has these nice parables, and I can see myself in the story somewhere. But this story, I don't. I don't identify with any of the characters. Now, to start with, there's the master. Well, the master who owns the whole thing, right? And what happens here? I don't see myself as the master, because the master, comes to the bad steward. And I said, wait a minute, this sounds like God's in charge, kind of. And I go, no, I don't identify as God. Now, do I identify myself as the dishonest steward? No, I don't do that either, because the dishonest steward, he was working with these other people to work a backdoor deal, right? So I don't identify with that guy much either. And then I guess, looking through this whole thing, what would happen to you if you did this in our world? Why, they'd haul you off to jail, wouldn't they? You'd be hauled into a court along with those you had conspired with. There'd be a trial. You'd be found guilty because you had defrauded the master. But yet there's a part of me that understands the dishonest steward. This part is what I identify with. He is losing a very good job, right? And he says, hey, I'm going to be out in the street. What am I going to do? So he says, well, I want to protect myself, my home. Maybe he has a family, his house. That part I can understand. You'd try to take care of yourself. But we didn't read this, but the story goes on after verse 13, just two more verses, and let me just summarize them. Jesus looked at the people who were listening, and it wasn't just the disciples. There was also a big group of Pharisees. Here's what he says to the Pharisees. Pharisees, you lovers of money, you justify yourself, but God knows your heart. Whew. It's not just that God knows the Pharisees' heart. God knows my heart and your heart. Oh yeah, that's hard to think about. And what happens to you and me when we are caught with our hand in the cookie jar? What happens? Well, let's be honest. How many of you have been fired from a job? Hold up your hand. There was one day I was working at this company, and the foreman comes in and he says, I want you to work over there today on that machine. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he says, go punch out and get the heck out of here. I was gone, just like that, fired. But when trouble comes into our life, such as I'm talking about, Who do we lean upon? Do we lean upon Jesus Christ to get us through a time of job loss or maybe big injury and we can't work? I'm thinking here our culture doesn't lean on Jesus Christ. 90 years ago, it's October 1929, just a couple weeks from what happened? The Great Depression. Yeah, Wall Street crashed. Let's see, anybody here who's 90? We can't get any real live reports then, can we? Anyway, what happened at the stock market crash? The whole thing went down. There was the Great Depression, and they said that people in New York City leaped out of the 10th floor of their buildings to their death. Yeah. Who were they? Well, they were the dishonest stewards. Oh, yeah, they had bet greatly on this or that, and now it was all gone. They killed themselves. They committed suicide. And of course, a lot of other people simply went on and worked very simple, very plain jobs. And there was a lot of hunger and poverty. So that's what happened there. But the point for me is, where is our heart in all this? Where are our values, our faith, the righteous actions in the face of job loss, poverty, or economic calamity? So I thought, well, let's get a little more concrete here. What if Trinity Lutheran had to go through a depression? So what if we lost all our wealthy members? What if we didn't have a Jack's Place? The organ couldn't play, the band couldn't perform, we couldn't pay the electric bill. Oh, yeah. What if? Jesus said, the children of this age act more shrewdly than do the children of light. Now, you and I are the children of light. Yeah, those people out on the street, they're going to be a little smarter than you and I. But what Jesus does here is urge us to seek the true riches. He says you can't have two masters, God and wealth. Well, let me be a little more concrete. If I stole money from Trinity, or if I used my pastoral office and abused it somehow, what do you think would happen? Well, in our world, I can tell you what I think would happen. The church council would get together and they'd say, Pastor Cook, we don't need your services anymore. Yeah, they'd push me out the door, maybe bring criminal charges against me, or even worse. That's what happens in our society, right? You've worked places. If somebody steals, what happens to them? Gone. They're fired. Oh, yeah, and maybe worse. Now, that's our world. I've just described how it works. But today, and here's the big but, God doesn't work that way. No, God doesn't work like that. God forgives, welcomes, and invites us to table fellowship, even though we have squandered his grace. Yeah, even though we've wasted what God has given us. Do you remember the story of the prodigal son? What did the prodigal son do? He got his part of the inheritance from his father and went off. He had a great time. In fact, the word used in the prodigal son story is he squandered his living with a great time, riotous living. But our God is not that way. Our God's grace and mercy is so large and so complete, it transforms us. with its power. Now, I will say, quite simply, if someone did steal money from Trinity, I'd hope we welcomed them back. I hope we would welcome them back. But we wouldn't let them handle the money any longer. Sure enough. Now, I hope you are scrupulously honest. Just an honest person. You don't steal from people. But do we then recognize we are still in need of God's grace? Even though we're honest, do we still see that we have to act graciously towards others? Because Jesus told this parable for who? For his disciples and for the greedy Pharisees, right? But he also told this parable for us. Yeah, this parable is for us. Now, the dishonest steward, what did he do? Well, he said, hey, I'm losing a good job, and I'm going to work the system here. He knew the power in the community, and he had it. So he said, take your bill and mark it from 100 to 50. Think about the dishonest steward in this story. Who is the dishonest steward? In fact, it is God. Yeah, the dishonest steward is God. It is God who not only takes our bill and marks it from 100 to 50. No, God takes our bill and marks it paid in full, forgiven. You don't owe a thing. God says our debt is paid. And God's grace comes through those who are faithful to God's promise. You know, our gracious God has given so freely of himself in Jesus. We've been claimed in baptism, forgiven, loved from the power of sin and death. And now we're called to be the bearers of God's grace. Even though we've squandered God's grace, how many times? Oh, yeah. We wasted it away. But now we're called to give God's grace away. So what do? Every Sunday we gather here, the doors are open. We invite the whole town to our church. We invite all of us who are sinful and flawed creatures, to share in this word and this meal, to come here for the grace of God. Martin Luther described us this way. Martin Luther said, we are beggars asking other beggars, hey, where's some good bread? I need some bread. That's who we are, beggars. I think we have to rid ourselves of the notion that we're fit, that we're wonderful, that we're honest, that we're respectful. No. We are broken vessels, but Jesus takes us and puts us together and makes us new and fit vessels. A Roman Catholic theologian, Henry Nouwen, calls us wounded healers. Wounded healers. Yeah, we are very wounded, but God uses us to become the healers of this world. That's what the cross did for us. So today you have two alternatives. One alternative, we can stay at home, count our money like King Midas, and say, this is my money, I'm going to spend it however I want. The other alternative is to serve God graciously, to trust God's way of giving away himself to everyone. The two ways of living are before us. You can't do them both. We cannot serve God and money. Amen.